Mes réactions, n'est-ce pas, vous savez que les Nations Unies portent toute la responsabilité.
He says that the United Nations carry the whole responsibility.
De tous les massacres.
For all the massacres.
Pas reconnaître, mais ils portent la responsabilité. Les faits sont là, ils nous ont attaqués.
The fact is there, and we were attacked, he said.
We were surrounded completely for about 8 days. We fought only in self-defense. The Irish troops here, and I think the job of all the United Nations is to keep the peace with the minimum use of force. And we did that. We fired only in self-defense.
Pat Quinlan, day and night, not just in the siege as it became known of Jadotville, but as prisoners, day and night, he was being called upon. And he never, never backed down. I think every man in the unit felt that he was badly treated in view of the heroic attempts that he made on everyone's behalf.
No Irish soldier since the Civil War had been in a position of such responsibility. There were no books, there were no manuals, there was only his own integrity, and to do exactly what he thought was best for the men he was privileged to command. I think his actions in Jadotville were most commendable.
I mean, you have to remember, my father was 42 years of age at that time. He was quite a religious man, a tough man, but religious man at the same time. And he saw more than just a Jadotville situation. I remember in his letters, he said, we didn't come out here to be killing African people. He said, we came out here to help them. So while he was a very good commander, and they certainly killed a lot of the enemy, he didn't see that as his mission. And he certainly didn't see it as his mission to lose his men.
Everyone was out and dressed in their very best. Indeed, they couldn't wait to start the jubilation. Perhaps these were in the nature of a dress rehearsal. Anyway, the people put on a good show.
In 1960, a brave new world is ushered in as the colonial powers give up their colonies around the world. In June, the Congo celebrates independence after 75 years of Belgian rule. Days later, Belgian interests were threatened when Congolese soldiers rebelled against their white officers. Belgian soldiers reoccupied the country and brutally crushed the mutiny. Congolese Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba called on the United Nations for help. Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld dreamt of transforming the UN into an instrument for resolving international crises. Optimistically, he saw the Congo as an ideal opportunity to show what he could accomplish. UN peacekeepers poured quickly into the Congo and Belgian troops withdrew, except from the wealthiest province, Katanga. With Belgian encouragement and support, its president, Moïse Tshombe, declared independence, backed by mining company Union Minière.
It would be understood that were the United Nations to act as proposed, the Belgian government would see its way to withdrawal. It follows that the United Nations force would not be authorized to action beyond self-defense. It follows further that it may not
Hammarskjöld managed to persuade Tshombe to allow UN troops into Elizabethville, Katanga's capital, and the Belgian army officially withdrew. But hundreds of Belgian soldiers remained behind to run Tshombe's army. When Lumumba tried to invade Katanga with Soviet support, the CIA paid Army Chief Colonel Joseph Mobutu to overthrow him and dissolve parliament. The UN did not recognize Mobutu and now took over the immense task of running the Congo and restoring law and order.
France, Lebanon, Liberia, Mexico, Soviet Union, United Arab Republic.
Number of members voting 82.
United Kingdom.
Majority required 41.
United States.
And the result of the vote, Boland of Ireland, 46.
I should only like to say that I assume the duties of this office with the deep sense of obligation and responsibility which extends in equal measure to every delegation in the Assembly.
Ireland's objective in joining the UN was to pull herself out of her post-war isolation. In September 1960, an Irish diplomat was elected President of the General Assembly. The Congo operation gave the Irish government and people the opportunity to feel that they were playing a role in world affairs. Over the next 4 years, over 6,000 Irish troops would serve there.
What is Irish public opinion like at this moment, sir?
The public opinion in Ireland is in favour of the Congolese people getting a chance, and that they should be allowed to find their feet, and that people shouldn't be trying to make trouble for them for their own reasons.
2 Irish battalions of 1,300 soldiers embarked on US troop transporters and flew into a situation fraught with uncertainty and danger. Just weeks later, the Irish suffered their first casualties. In Katanga, an Irish patrol was massacred at Niemba by Baluba tribesmen they were there to protect. The Irish army received a harsh lesson in the realities of peacekeeping in the Congo.
Well, going out the first time, we certainly didn't know what we were getting into. And I don't believe the officers knew either. The second time we went out, we weren't as innocent. We knew that things were a lot different now, and that's why Commandant Quinlan had all this special training in Athlone, which you wouldn't normally do.
I found him to be very abrasive and a difficult man to deal with. And I had no empathy with him, not he with me, because he was always demanding the highest possible standards. And very often, in my case, my platoon and myself didn't measure up, particularly in the question of anti-riot drill.
He had drills for instance, if we were suddenly attacked, what we were going to do and what our replies would be. And he would have us on trucks travelling along and suddenly declare an emergency, and we'd be flying off the trucks and throwing grenades and shooting in all directions. His idea there was to have an immediate response.
Ireland's UN role received a further boost with the appointment of Lieutenant General Sean McKeown as Supreme Commander of the United Nations peacekeeping forces in the Congo. He left for Leopoldville, the capital of the Congo, in January 1961.
General, you've just come back from a comprehensive tour of your troops in the Congo. Are you satisfied with the military situation?
Yes, I returned on Tuesday evening last from a week's tour of units in the Congo. I haven't seen all of them yet. Generally speaking, I'm satisfied. I'm satisfied with the spirit and morale of the troops I've seen. The overall military situation is a much wider problem, though.
The eyes of the world were focused on the Congo when ex-Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba was killed in Katanga by Tshombe, with the involvement of Mobutu and Belgium. Watching UN soldiers did nothing. Their instructions were not to interfere in internal Congolese politics. Lumumba's murder was the defining moment in African history, when the continent was welcomed into the Cold War. But the real conflict now was over who would control the continent's vast mineral wealth, the old colonial powers, the US, or the Soviet Union. There were calls for the UN to leave the Congo.
Speech is interrupted by a well-organized demonstration in the gallery. But Hammarskjöld stands firm, refusing to bow to communist pressure. His contention that disaster would result if UN troops leave the Congo is backed both by President Kennedy and by
a new resolution was passed calling for the expulsion of foreign military personnel and political advisors and a restoration of Congolese unity. It was clearly aimed at Tshombe and his Belgian supporters. The mandate was strengthened to allow for the use of force by UN troops to prevent civil war, as a last resort. Nothing happened for several months, until the appointment of Conor Cruise O'Brien as UN Special Representative to Katanga in July 1961. He arrived in Elizabethville, the capital city, with the belief that Katangese independence was a threat to the existence of the UN.
Doesn't that in fact mean crushing President Tshombe? Not necessarily individually. One could imagine President Tshombe coming to terms, as I believe he would come to terms, if the mercenaries were removed and if the UN was sufficiently, if he were convinced of the UN's determination to reunify the Congo.
Any attempt to disarm regular units would be met with 100% resistance. United Nations troops would have to make a war of conquest of colonialist type, which is against the principles of United Nations. In any case, the United Nations would need more troops than it could ever obtain.
Ag barrack míle a bhí im le clia sul má dogadar bhí práidir lethe gifigí agus saidúrí an tuchacúiú caháin. Timpeall chuig céad fear bhór seáil agus tháinig tíiseach agus airí eile rialta se fearadh. Is a gceile Etlán Mhóra Globemasters I cheoladar ar a taras fada go Leopoldville sa Congo le leanacht go Yao Aberd na Síochána. Sa gáán seo tá saidúrí as camplacht A ceanna sa níorthar, camplacht B ceanna sa deisceart agus camplacht C camplacht tréála an Carey.
We were proud of my father, of course, going out in that position as a company commander. It was a big thing in the neighbourhood. But he wasn't the only one. We lived in an area in Athlone where you had a lot of officers, NCOs, men. All the people that were with my father, most of them were from Athlone, and they all lived within, I'd say, half a mile of where we lived.
The first time I saw Common Quinlan, and he was common at that time, I was shortly after joining them and I didn't know how to salute. He was the first man to show me how to salute an officer. And from that moment, I knew that man had a big heart. I had respect for him.
When the opportunity came to volunteer for overseas service, I jumped at it, naturally enough. Every young soldier did. And in June 1961, I was one of the 35th Battalion that headed for the Congo. My first time ever to see an aircraft, never mind flying one. I never saw one before.
And I just wanted to get out there for, I suppose, like all the lads, a bit of adventure. See what the world was like. I'd never been on a plane before. I'd never been out of Ireland before. And I suppose neither had about 90% of the company. I'd never seen outside of Ireland.
We could put armour cars into the belly of all sorts of Europe, and one of them was never lost. We landed in Wheeler's Air Base in Tripoli for a refuel going down and up again down to the Congo. mind you, you had no way of running with the heat.
The heat was unbearable as soon as we walked down off the plane, because we were dressed in army uniform, bull's wool, for the roughest of winters, not for tropical wear. So it was a very, very, very severe heat. Very hard to breathe.
But it was very stressful on soldiers having to do duties and carry weaponry, because your weapons was hot too. Your guns was hot. Hand grenades in particular, because they drew the heat and they seemed to be dangerous.
God bless us. If you put your arm on a bonnet of a car around 2 o'clock in the day, you'd stick to it. Unreal. It was 46 times. Unreal. And when it would rain, it didn't rain. It was like a river running out of the sky.
The conditions in relation to where we were posted, the billeting arrangements, in other words, were not good. And indeed, it was quite obvious to all of us that the Irish were not getting the best pick of the available lodgings.
No electricity, no running water, and no latrines. So it was an eye-opener for young soldiers to go into in a situation like that.
Well, you didn't. We had rice and we had corned beef and powdered spuds. I don't know, did you ever see them? Terrible yolks. But they'd fill a hole in your belly, that kind of thing. And peas. I think every pea in Europe was in the Congo.
The whole of Katanga is on a plateau, flat as a table for hundreds of miles all around, with small stunted trees and elephant grass 5 to 6 feet high. Slow-moving, twisting, dark green, muddy rivers winding their way to God knows where. It is a featureless and uninteresting sun-baked land, with clouds of red dust from the hard red earth. It is now midwinter, sometimes very hot, sometimes cold enough, especially at night. There is nowhere much to go at night except a few parties. It is not recommended or safe to go anywhere else. I'm writing this in my room and I have all your photos here in front of me. And I have a drop of whiskey beside me. So here is good luck.
Well, it was a peacekeeping mission, of course, and at that stage in Katanga, which was the wealthiest province in the Congo, they wanted to be segregated from the rest under Moise Chambé and the Belgian masters that he had. And the UN decided that they were not going to be allowed to break away and take the wealth of the Congo from the rest of the population. And, of course, there was faction fighting between different tribes. The Baluba comes to mind immediately, the Baluba Kasai people. And we were there to sort of be a buffer between them and to keep the peace, which looked like working for the first month or two.
Since he declared Katanga independent of the rest of the Congo, Chombe has been busy taking lessons in how to project his personality. He's trying to present himself as the father of the people. It's slow work in Katanga's complex tribal society.
All senior officials in Katanga were Belgian. The province had 35,000 whites who enthusiastically supported Chombe. The Katangese army, or gendarmerie, was run by white officers, mostly Belgian, with a sprinkling of French mercenaries. Without these, he could not maintain his secession, and the UN saw their removal as its prime objective. Hammarskjöld's policy was to seek a peaceful solution, with the threat of military force only to be used as a last resort. Once settled in, Quinlan continued the training regime he'd pursued in Ireland, adapting it to the new terrain and pushing the men relentlessly. He was determined that they should be proud of being UN soldiers. Indian Brigadier General Raja took over UN forces in Katanga. His arrival with a brigade of Indian soldiers brought a willing ally for O'Brien, who favoured a tough approach to Chombe and was prepared to stretch the terms of the UN mandate to the absolute limit. Brigadier Raja was impressed with Commandant Quinlan's dispositions when he reviewed A Company and praised him to battalion headquarters.
Commandant Quinlan was insistent that we would exercise and train on a very regular basis. And again, unfortunately, I could never measure up with my platoon to Commandant Quinlan's standards. So much so that when eventually I got an opportunity to volunteer for a patrol to a town called Dilolo, which was on the Angolan border, I was delighted to get the opportunity just to be away from the tentacles of my company commander. Got to Dilolo, there was a fair bit of tension when we entered the town. We did find the native family, got them into a minibus, and then returned as quickly as possible back to Kolwezi. During that journey, we lost one of the armour cars, which broke down, it crashed into a ravine on the side of the road. We also lost one of our trucks.
The UN lacked sufficient troops to police this vast country as big as Europe, with the result that they were spread too thinly. The obsolete equipment supplied by the Irish Army was not up to the rigours of Congolese conditions. Transport continually broke down, and radio equipment often failed to work. Quinlan discovered that Raja and